Hello everyone, good morning. Welcome to MuleSoft training by Geeks. In this video, we'll see how to use a private flows in a Mule application. So first of all, what is a private flow? As the name itself suggests, a private flow will not have a listener, meaning you cannot invoke that flow directly. Okay, so you will have to invoke that flow from another flow within a Mule application. So in this video, we'll see how to use and configure private flows in a Mule application. And we'll also discuss when you might probably want to use that. Okay, so let's get started. So let's first create a Mule project, give it a name. Okay, you have the project created now and a flow created with the same name. Let's drag and drop a listener component. And we'll call it as a private flow. I'll perform a get operation on the private flow. We'll create a new configuration. Go with the default options. And you might want to add in a set payload component here. And we'll call it as flow 1 payload. And let's call this as a flow 1. And to avoid confusion, let me also just rename this to a flow 1. Okay, so I've got a flow in a Mule application, flow 1. And all I'm doing is setting payload to flow 1 payload in there, flow 1 payload. And what I want to do is I want to show you how to add a private flow to a Mule application and how to invoke it from another flow. So to do that, what you can do is you can drag and drop a set payload component on the canvas, and you will see a private flow getting created. How do I know that this is a private flow? A private flow will not have a listener, but it will have an error handling component. Okay, so let's rename this as private flow. And you cannot have a listener on a private flow, and you can set the payload. Yes, of course you can. And you will call it as private flow payload. You will not get to see this because, yeah, instead of setting the payload, we could probably do a logger as well. So we could probably log a message saying that private flow invoked from main flow. Okay. And you don't need to set the payload because anyways, it doesn't matter if you set the payload here or not, because we're going to invoke the private flow from a main flow and you're setting a payload there. So it gets overwritten there. So let's save the application. And you've got two flows now, flow 1 and flow 2. And the flow 2 or the second flow is a private flow, which does not have a listener, meaning if you deploy this application, you will be able to invoke flow 1 from Postman or from any other application, but you will not be able to invoke private flow because it doesn't have a listener component. Okay, so that is what a private flow means. Private flow is a flow without a listener, but with an error handling framework. Okay, and I want to invoke this private flow from my main flow. So when do you typically use private flow? If you have, say, a set of actions that you want to perform, or a set of repeated tasks, And if you want to perform the set of tasks at multiple places in flow one, say for example, the flow one is a complex one. You've got say a 10 or 15 process in there, and at 3 or 4 points in the main flow, you want to execute the private flow, because if in the private flow you might do something like inserting a record into audit table, or um, yeah, you might be doing any of those repeated tasks in the private flow. So if you have two or three steps to be performed at multiple places in flow one, with those 2 or 3 steps, or you will include those 2 or 3 steps of process in private flow, and you will invoke private flow in the flow one wherever you want those 2 or 3 steps to be executed. So that way you can avoid a code redundancy or code duplication. Without a private flow, one obvious way is wherever you need those 3 steps, you will include those 2 3 steps at 4 places in flow one, which means a 3 into 4, 12 processes. It is obviously a data duplication, right, or a code duplication rather, right? So to avoid that, you can use a private flow. And how do you invoke a private flow from a main flow? You can do it with the help of a flow reference. You drag and drop a flow reference, and you can invoke a private flow from there. So click on the drop down, you will see a private flow, and you can change this name. You could probably call it as invoke private flow. Okay. And in the private flow, let's do one more thing. Let's add in a transform message component, and let's make this private flow wait for 5 seconds. And we can do it with the help of our data weave expression. So I'm just making a private flow wait for 5 seconds with the help of this transform message component. So I'm adding a wait node with a 5000 milliseconds, and I'm printing a log message saying that private flow invoked from main flow. Okay. So once you deploy this application, so let's initiate the deployment first. We're going to, once application is deployed and it is up and running, we will invoke flow one. And you will only be able to invoke flow one. You won't be able to invoke private flow. That's point number one, because it doesn't have a listener. And after you invoke flow one, since you are invoking private flow from here with the help of a flow reference, this private flow gets kicked off. And the private flow, in the private flow, you've got a wait node of 5 seconds. And since you have used a flow reference without an async scope, so a flow one execution will stop here or pauses here. Control goes to private flow. Private flow execution will start. And since you have a wait node of 5 minutes there, 5 seconds there, private flow will pause for 5 seconds. And after 5 seconds, it will resume execution. It will print the log message. You will see the log message getting printed after 5 seconds. And after the log message is printed, control goes back to flow one. And in flow one, you've got another processor after the private flow invocation. This processor will get executed, wherein we are setting a payload to flow one payload. You should see this message coming back as a response to you after 5 seconds. That's because you are invoking a private flow from flow one. And in the private flow, you have a wait time of 5 seconds. Let's see if it works as expected or not. Okay, let's go ahead and send in a request now. Send in a request to flow one. You will see that you will have to wait for 5 seconds to see a response. And after 5 seconds, you see flow one payload getting coming back to you as a response. And if you look at the console, you will be able to see a log message printed there after 5 seconds. So this message is printed to the log, not immediately when the flow one request is received, but after 5 seconds. So just to demo it one more time, let me kick off a request again. You don't see a message getting printed now. Only after 5 seconds, you will see a message getting printed. And after that, a control goes back to flow one, and then it will execute the processor after that. So even if it is a private flow, you will still invoke it with a flow reference, and the calls will still work in a synchronous fashion as it works if this has been a normal flow instead of a private flow. And I've explained in the previous video how to make this flow calls asynchronous with the help of async scope. In case you haven't watched that video, you can watch that video to see how you can make this, how you can convert this a private flow call from flow one to an asynchronous one. It is working in a synchronous fashion at the moment. Okay. So in the next video, we'll see how to use a subflows, which is again a different type of flow that you could have in a Mule application. Okay, in a Mule application, you could have different independent flows. You could have a flow and a private flows, and you could have a flows as well as a subflows. In the next one, we'll see how to use subflows. Please join me in that video. Thank you very much for watching this video, guys. In case you are interested in MuleSoft training offered by Geeks, please call us on this number or send a WhatsApp message. You can also mail us on info@geeks.com. Thank you.